Welcome to another Rackspace Office Hours Hangout. We've got a lot of big things going on, as you might have noticed, and we're excited to talk about one of those today, Managed Security. We're going to get into the new Rackspace Managed Security offering. We've got a guest here, Jarret Raim. I'm going to let him introduce himself, and then we'll get into a little bit more of it.
Sure. Hi, everybody. So my name is Jarret Raim. I'm the head of strategy and operations for Rackspace Managed Security.
And how long have you been a Racker, Jarret?
So I just hit my 5 years a couple of weeks ago.
Well done. I'm about a couple of weeks from mine, so glad to have you on for that time. What other things have you done while you've been around here?
Let's see. So I started as an internal security application architect. So my job was to help make internal Rackspace software that we use to run the cloud more secure. Then I ran our product function for the security side over on cloud for a while, took over the entire security portfolio, and then moved on to building Rackspace Managed Security.
All right, so you've got a little bit of experience in the cybersecurity world.
That's my world all the way since high school.
Very, very nice. So we look forward to picking your brain a little bit on this new offering and the cybersecurity landscape generally. Before we go too deep into that, I want to mention that there's a bunch of ways to interact with us on this show. For the long tail of this show, hit us up on Twitter. We use the hashtag CloudQA. We've got our Twitter handles here on our lower third. So if you have specific questions and want to interact, we would be happy to answer those questions, interact in that way. If you have questions live, we've got a couple of ways to interact. So we have both the Q&A app through Google Hangouts, and then we have the Crowdcast interaction. So if you're watching us at live at ohpodcast.com, you can interact with us there, and we look forward to getting questions and interaction that way while we have specific expertise on the show live, and that's a great time to get those questions in, and we'll try to answer them. But let's really focus on this managed security offering. The first thing I'd kind of like to cover is what brought us to the point where we decided this needed to be offered and called out specifically, because Rackspace has been involved in cybersecurity for a long time. So Jarret, could you talk us through that kind of story and timeline of where we got to where we are now?
Sure, yes. So Rackspace has historically been a point solution-based vendor, right? So, hey, look, if you needed some intrusion detection, I got that for you. Or if you wanted some managed antivirus, I got that for you. And there were two driving forces that caused us to kind of rethink that. One was that the attack landscape or the threat landscape really changed dramatically over the last couple of years. It's matured significantly. It's moving much faster. The operational tempo inside of it is much quicker. And the rise of the more sophisticated kind of advanced persistent threats or APT-style attacks was becoming more prevalent. The second thing that we saw was our customers were having a really hard time getting and maintaining the expertise to defend against this new threat landscape, right? And so we could hand them an intrusion detection system, and that IDS was managed, right? We would take care of it, and we would update the signatures and do all the work to the care and feeding to make it functional. But that's only one part of a larger security story. And our customers were having a really hard time putting together that holistic vision, right? And keeping up with it and keeping up with the changes in the infrastructure. And of course, funding it, right? At the end of the day, good security is expensive. And so going out and building the security operations centers and various other things that are required to do that type of thing is an expensive prospect, right? So we kind of went back to the drawing board and we said, okay, well, these are problems that our customers have. You know, how can we go help them solve them, right? In addition, we saw a lot of more customers moving into the security space, both because just knowledge and awareness is growing, but also that we're seeing a dramatic increase in the compliance requirements that are being leveraged against customers, both customers that are falling under compliance for the first time, customers whose scope of compliance has gotten a lot wider, or something that we saw a lot at Rackspace, what we call trickle-down compliance. And what we were seeing there was customers they didn't necessarily have a compliance requirement themselves, but when they went to go sell to big companies, those big companies were saying, hey, look, no, you need to do all of these things to prove to us that you're taking care of our data. So our customers were coming to us for help with that. So all of that kind of came together at the end of last year to really force us to have a larger conversation about what the offer should be. So we kind of went back to the drawing board and kind of came up with the new offers that we wanted to put in the market, and we started building those kind of the beginning of this year.
Okay, and as Rackspace has been, in the cyber world for a long, long time, how much of this offering is putting kind of bringing together previous offerings in just a more, I guess, easy to understand and consume single package, and how much of it is newly developed and newly brought into the fold so that the offering is more full, more complete, and meets some of these emerging needs a little bit better.
So we've had a lot of different suppliers that we've worked with over the last 7 to 10 years at Rackspace, and so we have good relationships with them. We've worked strategically with them for years. We have a lot of input into the business and the products that they've built and the direction that they go, right? And so some of those stuck around. We also had another source of influence, which is our internal security operations center, right? The group that's required, or their job is to protect Rackspace as a whole from these types of attacks, also had a lot of experience, right? They've had to up-level their capability over the years to deal with this new threat landscape, and so they've learned a lot of things. Sometimes, they had to go out and get new tools, and they had to evaluate new vendors that were different from things that Rackspace was selling for customers. So we kind of pulled both of those sources of influence together. So I would say that, there are definitely some older vendors that have been around at Rackspace for a long time that are good partners for us. There's also some new ones, right? Everything from, our CrowdStrike kind of partner that we use for host-based protection. People may have seen the news that we invested in them before because we believe so strongly in that platform that we wanted to be a part of it. So those are key partners for us, and even our new vendors, right? Rackspace always has a mission to have strategic partnerships rather than suppliers that we pull data from or pull products from. And so it's really about even the new guys bringing that on. A large service provider, we have different needs than a large enterprise does. So sometimes, multi-tenancy obviously is a very large issue for us. Scalability is a very large issue for us, and so most tools out of the box don't work that well at Rackspace, and we have to work with that team and write our own code and our old tools and automation around making those function. So most of it, I would say, the majority of it is kind of new providers over the last year or two, and then we've still got some providers that go all the way back 7 or 8 years that are still part of the solution.
Well, that's really interesting. I know we talk to customers on a daily basis, and there's some old standbys that have been just part of the conversation for as long as I've been a racker, and it's exciting to see some of these new products that fit specific markets. Your conversation around some of the specific challenges of multi-tenancy and some of the specific partners we've had for such a long time, being a hardware provider for a really long time, it kind of goes into one of the questions that's been asked already. So I'm going to talk about that for a moment. Alan asks, is this tool for customers on dedicated hardware, or is it open for cloud computing customers too? And that really speaks to what platforms are addressed as far as being a Rackspace customer. How far-ranging would this offering fit?
Yes, so two really interesting parts to that question, right? So the first is that the new offers are explicitly not tool offers. Right? Rackspace is not a tool vendor. I don't build tools. I don't have a dog in the fight. Right? At the end of the day, we go out to the tool space and we pick the right places that we work with. And there's been a huge amount of investment in the security space over the last 4 or 5 years. And so you have a lot of these really small providers or new providers that are coming up. And it takes an enormous amount of time to dig through them and understand what they're technically doing, how it works, what its strengths and weaknesses are, how it can interface with the rest of the tools that you have in your environment. So the offers that we put together, we're based around the fact that most of our customers don't have the time and expertise to go and evaluate 200 vendors to figure out the right platform, right? And so we actually go out and do that for them. So we sell managed services, and then we actually reach into our bucket of tools and figure out what the right tools are for that particular customer, right? So we look at who they are, what data they store, what vertical they're operating in, what threat actors are active in the vertical, and what techniques do the bad guys use to attack customers who are in that space, right? How do we protect against it? At the end of the day, it comes down to things like network, visibility is different in dedicated than it is in doing it in AWS, right? So, even at Rackspace, we have to support a dedicated environment, 3 private clouds, and a public cloud, and we now support AWS, we now support Azure, right? And we're starting to do on-premise stuff for customers, even going so far as to talk about doing things around their laptops that they issue to their employees, right? So we knew we were going to have to support a wide variety of platforms. That's our goal. I think the question here was, hey, look, what platforms do you support today, right? And so typically right now we're mostly focused on the dedicated and private cloud install bases at Rackspace. We launched AWS 2 weeks ago. We'll be firming up dedicated stuff and then working on Rackspace Public Cloud, Azure, and on-prem stuff will be coming here, end of this year, beginning of next year as we kind of get those things out. At the end of the day, the support offering is baked. We're happy with it, right? It's where we want it to be. We're going to continue to grow that offer. Really kind of making it work on all the platforms is about, hey, do I need a new tool here that I got to go get? I got to build automation to make sure that it's effective and it's easy for customers to use and easy to deploy and provides the value, right? Got to make sure that the billing models match what customers expect, right? The billing model on dedicated is very different from the billing model for AWS. And so that's really the tuning of the offer. So the people, the expertise, the security operations center, that's the same across all the offers. It's really just fitting it deeply. I think one of the missions and thoughts that we had going into this is customers that come and talk to us are generally opinionated about what platforms they want. Right, they're a Rackspace customer or an AWS customer or a VMware customer, and so we want to tune the Rackspace Managed Security offers to those platforms so that they fit in the best with the platforms that customers choose to use. So right now, that's where we are today. I'd say that we're actively soliciting feedback in additional customers, including early access customers, which means the offer is free, but it allows us. They're helping us build the offer, and we'd love customers to come on board and help us think about where we should go next from a platform perspective.
Well, there's actually a question in the Q&A app that I think kind of dovetails into this. And Lou asks, does this require other Rackspace services like critical sites, or can it be more standalone? So are there absolute requirements that go with adopting managed security today, or is it a little bit more broad than that?
So it's a little more broad than that. I think the way we think about it is differentiating between customers in which Rackspace is supporting the operating system up through the OS on the guest or on the host, and areas in which we're only supporting up through the hypervisor, right? So when I support up through the OS, then I can deeply integrate our security operations folks with the customer support team. And that means when there is an incident, we can actually reach into the customer environment and make changes to deter and remove and otherwise interdict the attack traffic and the attackers in the environment. It's just a very powerful piece, right? If I can't manage the VMs, if I'm just managing the hypervisor, then I don't have that ability, right? So it's more about making sure we have the right communication with the customer so they can reach in and do that. So we generally don't require any particular service offerings at Rackspace. The only trick for things like AWS, for example, right now, we do require that customers are part of the fanatical AWS offer, the Rackspace support offer on AWS, before we can pick up the managed security piece. It's a temporary goal. We're in beta on AWS right now, so requiring that allowed us to kind of leverage some of the tools and work that those folks have already done. So we'll stay that for a while, but that won't stay that way forever.
That's really helpful. Thanks for covering Lou's question. I think that makes dovetailed nicely. Another question that I was thinking through was, now that we have done all of this research and we've seen all of the pre-work and we're in beta for some of these things, what were some of the big surprises or maybe big gaps that needed to be most quickly filled in our customers, potential customers' approach to cybersecurity? Are there any specifics that stood out as gaps that were most often missed?
Interesting. So certainly the biggest threat that we saw for customers, and the one that they were having the most challenge solving, is this kind of APT or advanced persistent threat style attack, right? So I'm not wild about APT. It's not the greatest term on earth, but it's what the community has decided to call it. So an APT is characterized by a motivated, well-funded, trained attacker with a goal who's attacking you, right? Attacking your business or possibly your vertical or even the technology that you're built on, right? And the key piece of that is it's persistent, right? So they'll hit you, they'll see where you're defending, and then they'll adjust their attack strength and they'll come at you again, right? So these are the types of attacks that Rackspace deals with on a day-to-day basis against our infrastructure. And so those attacks are very difficult to defend against, right? So when we look at the threats landscape, really broadly, you can separate it into two really big buckets. Right, the first is what we call the background radiation of the internet, right? And this is just bad people doing bad things, right? They're not targeting you, they're not targeting your business, it's spray and pray, right? They're just hitting everybody, it's like spam, and some percentage of the time they're going to be successful. And the nice thing about that is that while the operational tempo of those is increased, right, we can see a vulnerability hit the full disclosure list and get weaponized, in hours to days, to where they're really hitting like wide swaths of the internet with it. tools are still fundamentally effective most of the time against those types of attacks, right? So, making sure you stay patched, making sure that your tooling is up to date with the signatures that it needs and that type of thing, you can still do a pretty good job at defending against those types of attacks. What we really saw is when you've got these APT-style threats, right? This is not like the teenager hanging out in their parents' basement like that. I don't know if that ever existed, but if it did, it's certainly not true anymore. So you're talking about folks that do this for a living, and they're very good at it. And so the only way to really defend against a well-motivated, well-trained, well-funded attacker is to oppose them with a well-motivated, well-funded, well-trained defender. Right, and so that's why we invested in building a 24/7 security operations center here at the castle, which is what we call our headquarters in San Antonio. We'll continue to build security operations centers around the world where it makes sense to do so, kind of starting next year. So we're excited about that. We think that's the right way to do it. Going and building that expertise is Rackspace's core business. We've always been about going and getting that expertise, pulling it together, and then offering it to customers. Right, there's nothing that we're doing that a customer can't do. But it's hard, and it costs a lot of money, right? So we talk to a lot of our customers and say, hey, look, if you want to go build a 24/7 security operations center with the type of people that you need to defend against these types of advanced threats, you're in it for $3 to $5 million a year, right? And most customers can't afford to kind of have that outlay right now. And so we can help them kind of get that level of protection without having to outlay that amount of money, and to be honest, just to put so much focus on the security side, right? Especially for smaller businesses or startups. Even if you have the money, you don't have the mind share, you don't have the hours to go and build these types of things. So being able to rely on someone who's gone out and do that was important for us, right? So I think that's the biggest gap that we've seen. Certainly there are point solutions and stuff like that people can put in place that are super effective, but I think when we looked at the offer, we saw that as the biggest headache for customers, was being able to deliver that advanced level of protection while keeping it in budget, understandable, and kind of as a managed service.
Yeah, I think both of those, like that background hum that's going on the internet, is pretty. I feel like it's pretty well known, but we still see lists of, the most common passwords being password 123, and some of those kind of easy to solve but hard to get momentum against in addressing. You see, the iCloud, people were able to hack accounts, and you see that kind of thing happen all the time. But there's also those pretty high-profile and highly visible issues, the Ashley Madison story, all of the other major names that have been targeted, attacked, and it's been successful. All that stuff is, very much in the public eye. And the analogy that I've drawn in my head for security is really around like my home and my home security. First of all, I just try to put, I've got lights outside so that it's not real easy to walk up to the front of my house at night undetected, and I lock my doors and some of those basic things that just make me not the easiest target on the block. There are other easier places probably to get into, and so that's that background security. Like, I'm just going to do the basics to ensure that my house isn't an easy target. But I also try not to, drive up in a really fancy car with a really awesome sound system, all kinds of fancy rims and extremely nice watches, and make myself look like a huge target. Oh, that guy's probably got some awesome stuff in his house. I try to stay off that radar as much as I can. Some, I guess typically known parties out there. There's a certain religion that has always been attacked by DOSes and things like that on some of their major websites, and so there's no way to necessarily get around that at a certain point other than putting forward the effort. And we have a lot of customers who are trying to grow. Now might be a pretty big time to begin taking the steps necessary to preempt some of that. We're going to get the attention. People are going to be coming after us now that we're making a name for ourselves. Venture capital is coming into the conversation. So someone who's attempting to adopt this because they see that on their horizons, how would that first step or two go in adopting managed security for the first time? Somebody wants to get in on the beta. Somebody wants to get in on the ground floor of getting our assistance. What's that look like?
Sure. So I think there's a lot to unpack there, right? I think, there's always the analogy of like going out and doing these types of things. I mean, I think, at the end of the day, what's happened is that, leveraging these types of attacks, to be honest, is not very expensive, right? And so what we're seeing is even customers that historically kind of had this thought of, hey, I'm not flashy, I'm not exciting, no one's going to come after me, it's not really true anymore. I mean, I think what we saw one of the very large campaigns in 2015 and to a lesser extent in 2014 were attackers going after small businesses, right? These are local businesses, those types of things, people you wouldn't expect to be really high on the threat list from a cyber attack. But what they were focused on was going in and stealing information from that company that allowed them to file a false tax return against the IRS, pocket the money, and walk away, right? And attackers have been doing that to individuals for a lot of years, right? But all of a sudden, small business, it's a lot nicer because there's a lot more money there. And a lot of these small businesses don't have really any security at all, so it was relatively easy for them to get in. So this idea that like, hey, I'm not going to stick my head up anymore. It's like, well, too bad. You're on the internet. Everybody knows you're here. It doesn't really matter who you are. Like somebody's going to come rattling your doors, right? So the security community has really kind of moved away from thinking about prevention, right? We used to talk about prevent. Hey, you're going to prevent these attacks. You're going to keep them from getting in. You're going to build some high walls. And that doesn't work, both because the attacks have gotten more sophisticated, but because customers have chosen to use a lot of different IT technologies, public cloud and private clouds and hybrids, and looking into containers and some of the Lambda stuff and all these various other things that are floating around now make them more complicated infrastructures, allow very interesting stuff to be done on the IT side from a velocity perspective and a scaling perspective. They have different security needs, right? And so really what the security community has transitioned to is this talk about deterrence. And that was kind of your example of, hey, I'm going to put some lights up around my house. And someone said, those are deterrence things, right? They're not actually going to keep anyone out of your house if they want to get in, but you're going to make it harder for them to operate in the environment, right? So we have a second offer that we talk about as compliance assistance offer, but it's all about deterrence. It's all about making your environment more difficult and more expensive for an attacker to operate in, right? And so if you do that, then one, you can help keep them out, right? It does help do that. You still want to try to do that as much as you can, but it makes you a more expensive and more difficult target. So it makes it take longer for them to compromise things, and it makes it harder for them to exfil data and to stay in your environment. And so then we package that with the managed security piece, that whole security operations center and all those types of things. That's really focused on detect and response, right? So we assume from the ground up that if somebody really wants to get in, they're going to compromise your environment. They're going to get in, right? So the goal now is you really have to be able to detect that incursion as fast as possible and then respond to it to get them out as quickly as possible. And the more you invest on the deterrent side, the slower their movement is inside your environment, and so you have a longer chance to be able to detect them and get them out. But I think right now we got a big hill to climb. About most companies, the length of the breach from the time that they were breached to the time they know about it is like 9 months. I mean, that's huge, right? So attackers sitting in your environment for 2/3 of a year doing whatever they want, and that's the average, right? So half of those were significantly longer than that, right? So interesting space where we really want to get that detect and response window down to seconds to minutes, right? That's where you need to be. Like, they'll get in your environment, right? If somebody wants to burn a 0-day and jump in your environment, they'll do it, right? If somebody's motivated enough and you're worth enough money. And so you got to be able to detect that quickly and respond to it. So anyway, off to your second question, kind of how do you get involved, right? Obviously, you can come and talk to Rackspace. If you're a Rackspace customer, you can talk to your account team, or you can just reach out to Rack, and we're happy to talk to folks. What we generally do is we start with an onboarding process for customers. It helps us understand the environment and set up communication processes and all that type of stuff to get them all set up, and then we deploy the tools in the environment, get that security telemetry flowing, right? So we get that security data coming out of the environment. That gets pushed into to our analytics platform, which is what our SOC sits on top of, right? And then the security operations guys start doing that. So some of those tools get in and running in as short as a couple of hours to a couple of days. Some take a little bit longer, right? Depends on the customer environment for sure. But we're happy to have folks, and we also have a lot of kind of beta offers that we're testing that we're interested in customers that want to get involved with, right? They want to help us build an offer, help us drive it in the way they want to go, and give us feedback and those types of things. Always excited to have customers that are happy to do that.
So some of these things historically have needed a period of time to kind of get their feet set. If they're monitoring traffic, they need to know what normal looks like so they can measure that against future traffic. Is this still normal, or has something changed that we need to address more closely? Are there any things like that need to be kept in mind as you're beginning to launch your solution with managed security, or is it kind of all over the place? Could you talk through maybe some of that timeline?
Sure. It depends on the sensors and the types of platforms that you're using, right? So security is moving pell-mell towards big data, right? I think everybody is, but especially for us, right? When you look at typical security technologies like a SIM or some of these other types of things, they made their bones on throwing away a lot of the data that they came in, right? So they would look through this massive haystack of data, and they would try to pick out the bad things and tell you about them, and then they would throw the rest of it away. And that limited what you could do, right? But it was so much data that it was impossible to kind of build systems that could be performant and do what they needed to do while keeping all of it. So, the community is moving that direction, and a benefit of having these kind of big data approaches to things is you get into things like behavioral analysis and anomaly detection and some of those types of things. And to be honest, both of those are pretty low-level data science, right? There's still a lot of headroom to be able to go and do better stuff. If you're going to Black Hat and some of the other places in the community now, that's what you're hearing, right? You're hearing people come and talk about more advanced machine learning models that start to get interesting, right? And we're seeing certain suppliers that are being successful at that, and they're kind of moving that direction. So there's no doubt that over time we will get more and more tools, and some of the tools that we use today get more and more effective over time as they have more exposure to the environment. So that's good. I don't think it matters too much, right? At the end of the day, you're going to put a set of tooling in place. It's going to give you a serious level of protection from day one. Some tools will get more effective over time. But at the same time, people change their environments all the time, right? People are adding servers and dropping servers and changing the functionality and logging into things. And so the behavioral analytics is a nice option. It certainly provides a lot of value in certain key scenarios. But at the end of the day, what it comes down to is saying, okay, this machine learning and tooling and all the stuff that you built is going to surface an event, and it's going to say, hey, we think something bad might be happening. And a smart human's going to have to pick that event up and look at it and figure out what the actual answer is, right? Is this real bad? Did somebody do something here, right? There are a lot of clear-cut decisions on the security side, right? You see some file that 98% of people have marked as malware. Well, that shit's probably malware, right? But when you look at a lot of other things, it really comes down to a judgment call of really smart people with a lot of experience that have been in the world for a long time, that have seen a lot of things. And it's one of the benefits of doing the work at Rackspace, right? We have 300,000 customers, and so our security analysts get exposed to a whole lot of traffic, right? And so that means that, one, they like the job. It's a lot more fun to be able to kind of be wider and see a lot of the different stuff that's coming across. But it means that you get that experience fairly quickly, and it allows you to recognize when something's going on. And that's an important aspect to it. Like when we looked real hard, you can't go out and build a modern security platform with tools only right now, right? It really has to be backed by a set of people who know what they're doing and have the expertise and the experience to do it well.
And scope and scale really seems like the big factor right now that's holding people back from doing a holistic job of their side of this cybersecurity arms race. And so I think to be able to offer an offering with that backing of people who have looked through the entire ecosystem and are continuing to keep an eye on the ecosystem, who have that a long tail of experience with the breadth of our customers, can really exemplify and amplify the value that you get from approaching security with a partner. And so that's really a really exciting piece to this puzzle. I do want to take a moment then to address anybody who's watching live. We have a lot of ways that you can get involved in this conversation. We have a co-host who's doing a fantastic job of that through live at ohpodcast.com and the Crowdcast application. So submit questions there. You can submit questions through the Cloud QA app on Google Hangouts, and then through the comments in Google Hangouts and YouTube, as well as through Twitter. So put the hashtag CloudQA on your question or comment, and we'd be glad to jump in and address that. We have a wonderful question here from Tyler, our host, who wants to ask, has anyone ever told you, Jarret, that you look like Nathan Fillion?
Oh, well, no, but I'll certainly take it as a compliment. So Nathan is great.
So you're welcome and well done. And thank you, Tyler, for that question.
It's the softball question of the day.
Well, as we're transitioning through the middle of the hour, we thought we'd open things up a little bit. Lou's come back with another question, so let's get into that one. Does this service include or require hardware like IDS or IPS?
So, to be honest, depends on the customer environment, right? So, through dedicated hardware, right? For private cloud customers, it tends to be somewhat of a trade-off depending on the environment. So, a lot of our tools and stuff work very well with platforms like VMware, right? So they'll plug into the underlying network infrastructure with VMware. You can run it as a virtual machine on top of your infrastructure. You're starting to see the same thing with Hyper-V, and you're even starting to see a lot of that growth in the OpenStack community, right? So you're starting to see vendors like Catbird and a bunch of others that are out there building security technology specifically for OpenStack, right? Obviously, when you start getting into AWS and Azure land, things get weirder because you just don't have access to that level, right? So there are platforms that allow you to kind of do that either from plugging into the hosts, right? So a longtime partner of ours, AlertLogic, kind of takes that approach. You've also got another partner we're excited about, a company called vArmor that we've been talking to. They're doing some exciting stuff around network visibility. And I think we're starting to see the cloud providers really get into understanding that they need to expose this, right? So certainly it's been a theme at Rackspace. But even at the last reInvent a couple of weeks ago, we were out there and AWS launched their inspector offer, and it's the beginning of their work to kind of start to expose what's going on underneath the covers to customers in general, not just around security, but in a lot of areas. So I think we'll see more and more ability for us to get better, more comprehensive, more real-time data out of what's going on in the underlying infrastructure so that we can layer these tools in. Right, so as part of the managed security piece for us, a good part of that is really looking at the customer and what technology they're using to figure out what the right tools are. You know, at the end of the day, like I want to use the fewest number of tools possible across customers because it makes us more effective and it allows us to drive costs down for customers and offer things at a good price point, right? But at the same time, if the tool doesn't work, you got to have multiple tools. I think the biggest headache right now is network visibility, right? That's the hardest one to solve across the platforms. Host visibility, you know, look, servers are servers. So for the most part, where they're hosted is not too much of a problem. And so that's why you've seen the security community really focus on agents, right? Lots and lots of agents that are floating around. But even now, you're starting to see a rethink there as folks are really starting to think hard about what is doing security in a container-based world look like. Right? You're not going to launch 7 agents inside of your Docker container. That doesn't make any sense at all, right? So how are you going to go about doing that? What kind of feedback and hooks do you need into the Docker infrastructure to be able to do that? How do these overlay networks that are now getting built with Weave and these various other things impact what we used to do, right? So now you look at companies that are doing dedicated hardware and then putting Docker on top of them. Well, look, I could throw a device in the environment, but they're using this weird overlay network stuff, and so all of a sudden that device is not really going to understand it because it's not really IP anymore, or at least it's not in a way that you think about it. And we had some of the same problems when we started talking about software-defined networking, right? So still a lot of investment and a lot of catching up to be done there. You know, the nice thing is that, like we were talking about before, there's been a lot of investment in the security space, so there are a lot of folks kind of coming up and thinking about those problems pretty hard, and so are we, right? That's part of my job and my product managers at Rackspace's job is to spend a lot of time with all of those vendors to understand how they're solving these problems. Because our customers come to us and they want to do all kinds of stuff, everything from pure dedicated hardware up to container-based stuff. People want to use Lambda, they want to use the Redshift and all the various other platforms that Amazon provides, and they want to know how to do that securely, right? So part of our goal is to be able to have answers to those questions. That's the expertise-based thing, right? Look, we won't have them 100% of the time. Technology changes pretty fast, right? But a good part of our job and time is spent kind of understanding and thinking about how we would go about delivering services on top of those platforms.
Mute button is not appreciating
that'll
it very
teach
much. I know it. Tried to use the shortcut and I didn't like it. So complexity on one hand and comprehensiveness on the other, you need to be able to balance those. So to have the expertise to say that's unnecessary, this is necessary, and keep the complexity down while still being comprehensive, that can go a very, very long way.
Yeah, I think it's interesting for us, like, in the past, what we've historically seen is that security groups were able to say, hey, look, we're going to take this application and move it, or we're going to take this application and make it modern. And then they would say, hey, these other applications that store all of our sensitive data, you can't move those, right? Those have to stay where they are. And that narrative's changing. You know, the business is coming now, or the IT development organization is coming and saying, hey, look, to meet the business goals that we have, we got to move faster, right? We can't operate in this older model now. We need to go quicker. So security, you can't be the blocker anymore. You need to get up and figure out what you're going to do, right? And that's really the challenge for all of us in the security space, is to kind of keep moving on that. So you don't want to be the guy that says, hey, you can't use Docker yet, right? If that's what the business needs to solve the problem that they have, right, then we need to figure out how to do that in a way that's safe, right? And a way that enables, developers and development organizations to go out and solve problems that bring value to the business, right? While making sure that the business stays as safe as we can make it, right? It's never going to be 100%. There's always a trade-off, right? You can spend as much money as you want on security. It's like testing. You never know when you're done, right? So you got to make sure that you're putting your limited resources that you have in the places that are most effective to, save the business and move them forward in what they want to do.
Well, we have another few questions in the Office Hours listing here. So Alan's asked another good one that I think specifically with your background and expertise would be valuable to anybody if they're using our products or managed security or any of those things yet. And that's around ROI, return on investment of making an improvement. And he asks if only one thing could be done to improve security, what would you recommend that one thing would be?
Ooh, difficult question, right? So typically, obviously, we'd spend some time with the customer. Yeah, I know, right? We'd spend some time with the customer to understand what they have in place today. But assuming that our customer doesn't have a lot of things in place today, usually the number one thing I start with is looking for multi-factor authentication, right? Not only for stuff that you're using for your business, we should all be using this in our personal lives, right? Like multi-factor it's cheap. It's easy to deploy. It doesn't require a lot of security expertise to be good at it. It uses everybody's phones that they've already got, or if you want a hard token, you can get great ones from YubiKey for like no dollars. It's awesome, right? And at the end of the day, it provides really, really solid security value at a really low price, right? Like it's one of the challenges with the security market now is because most of the people buying security technologies are large enterprises. The prices for these things are very high, right? The market kind of demands a structure that forces people into charging really high prices for a lot of tools. And multi-factor is one of those things that you don't have to, right? Like you can get, a couple of dollars per user per month can get you some really, really great security. So it's a great place to start for most customers that have nothing, right? Obviously, if they've got a bunch of stuff already, we'd have to spend more time to figure out where the particular gaps are. But that's always a place that I like to look because there's so much value there for so little cost. Obviously, if we're talking about individuals, then usually it also includes a conversation about password managers, your LastPasses and your 1Passwords and some of those types of guys. I think there was a study that got put out, I forget who it was, Symantec or something recently, where they went and interviewed normal users on what they thought the best way to protect themselves were, and then they interviewed security professionals. And the big differences were patching wasn't on the normal users thing at all, whereas like number one for security professionals, and the other one was password managers, right? So those things can really kind of help make sure that you stay secure in your devices. And at the end of the day, if you look at the attack patterns, most of I think something like 75% or so of the serious attacks, the APT attacks that we saw last year and the beginning of this year were started by compromising credentials on a laptop through like an email or something like that, right? So if if you stay patched, if you've got two-factor turned on, then you can do a really good job at, defeating those attackers. You can't necessarily prevent them from getting into your laptop, right? Sometimes they'll be effective at doing that, but you can prevent them from leveraging that position to get deeper into your infrastructure and do more damage.
So that style of compartmentalization has been kind of the main thrust that I've seen be effective is, okay, you broken through this layer, but there's another gate and there's another gate. So if we can keep you within a specific space and identify that gives us that leg up to say we've only been compromised to this degree. We can verify that that has happened, but they're still at that layer and we can contain that. That's been a huge thing, and I make those recommendations around building modularly and building with that in mind for a variety of reasons, security not being the low on that list. I mean, that's a big piece of it. Do you do much around architecture recommendations in that space, or is that really going to be dependent on what they've already got in place and how to address that?
So a little bit of both, right? I think, certainly we'll make recommendations around architecture where it makes sense. In reality, most of the time you're dealing with existing infrastructures, including applications that are legacy that don't have developers or whatever it is, right? So, gets a little bit businessy, but at the end of the day, from a security perspective, you don't have the money, time, and energy to put the full court press on every single thing you got. And to be honest, not everything you got is super important, right? So our CSO, Brian Kelly, is great. He loves to tell this story about, like, we have a coffee shop inside the castle, which is our headquarters here in San Antonio. And look, if their register gets broken into, right, compromised, that's real bad, right? People can't get their coffee. They may steal some credit card numbers. That's pretty bad, right? That's not great. right? That's pretty low on my list of things to care about when I'm protecting Rackspace as a whole, right? Customer data is tops. Keeping customers up is number one, right? Those types of things matter more. So you have to be realistic about what applications you have, how valuable they are, and that will really tell you how many layers of protection you need to put around them. And again, from a security perspective, there are trade-offs. It's going to cost you money to do that. It's also a lot of times going to cost you usability from your users, right? So if Ground Ton's going to poison my coffee, lovely. But at the end of the day, like if you put in a lot of different controls to make it more difficult for attackers to get in, sometimes that'll affect your normal users too. So you really have to trade off some of that capability, right? When it's a really, really sensitive application, then you can ask your users, with a straight face to say, hey, look, you got to go through a couple of hoops to get here, right? Whereas, with something that's not as much, you may not care, right? So, trying to protect everything all at once is going to guarantee that you're pretty much not successful. So you got to be really kind of very cognizant about where you're going and what effort you put around stuff. We've talked to large customers who draw these lines inside their infrastructure, and they say, hey, look, I care about this a lot. I know there's no attackers in this space because I spend 80% of my time protecting this. And here's another chunk of my business that I spend 20% of my time. I know there are attackers in here. I know they're there. I don't see them yet, right? I'm not actively kicking them out at the moment, right, because I haven't found them yet. But nothing over there is that important, so I'm okay with that, right? That's how I divide my resources. And those are the choices that you have to make.
Yeah, we always talk about prioritization, and it rears its head in so many different places when you're thinking about your approach to your solutions from an IT standpoint. And really, that's what's necessitated here, to look at what's the most important thing, how much am I willing to spend in prevention, in detection, in structuring this in a certain way. And really, when it comes to this conversation about this support offering, that prioritization still needs to be a part of that conversation. Do you need to have full control, full access, full visibility, and own the whole thing? Do you need to build your own SOC? Do you need to build your own team and series of tools and outfit your approach with all of that? Or do you really need to spend your money differently? Do you need to focus on marketing and focus on product development and offload that work to someone else who can spend the time to do a thorough job of that? Or do you need to go beyond that and do a little bit of both? But prioritization, really can't make strong business decisions without a clear understanding of where those priorities are, both within your infrastructure, within the business. What's the key importance? If cash flow is the problem, then you should probably be directing your money towards increasing that cash flow so that you can put it towards the next thing on the priority list. It's going to depend on your business, and it's going to depend on your approach. But I can't emphasize enough the importance of having that conversation and knowing pretty well all the time what's the top priority, because that'll drive a lot of those decisions. That'll drive, do we need to stop right now and focus on kicking out the security threat we know is happening on this key resource, or is that spinning our wheels, spending money, spending time, spending resources towards something that, at the end of the day, so they got, some logos and some of this swag stuff that's not as important as our customer data and whatever else you've identified. So I think that's a conversation that everyone needs to be having all the time. I mean, once you need to revisit to be sure that still the priority. But I think that goes far beyond this conversation, but it's vital to this conversation.
No, it's absolutely true, and I think it's one of the things we delve into in the onboarding process, right? Is to understand, how we go about doing that, right? And understand, get that data from a customer. But I think what we've seen that's been interesting is, even customers that have decided that want to go build a security operations center, a lot of times have a hard time doing it, right? Obviously hiring these folks is difficult, retaining them is difficult, but even getting the strategic leadership from the security side to go out and do that is hard, right? I think there was a study by Microsoft, a couple other people last year, that said there was something like a million InfoSec jobs in 2014 that didn't get filled. These people just don't exist, so it's very difficult to do that. And then even for some of our very, large or very sophisticated customers, we're seeing the fact that, look, they went and built a security operations center, right? They invested the time and energy and money to go build it, and these are great SOCs, and they do great work. And then all of a sudden the business comes along and says, okay, well, you built this whole SOC with the assumption that you were going to have everything in your data centers. But now the business wants to use Rackspace, and they want to use AWS, and they want to use Azure, right? And so all of a sudden the SOC is looking down the teeth of saying, oh God, I used to have 10 tools that I had to be an expert in, but now I have 30 or 40. So when they go and look at expanding that to be able to cover that footprint, it's hard. So we operate in a couple of customer environments as kind of force multipliers, right? So, at the end of the day, we go out and we deliver the tools and we put them in place and we monitor and maintain them. And when the events come in, they go through our SOC. But our handoff, our contact in the customer is another security operations center, right? So we hand off that and say, hey, look, this one's important. Like, we ring your bell when it matters. You need to go look at this one and make decisions, because they will have more of that business context, right? And so they can make better decisions sometimes around what they need to do in the environment and what's most important to the business.
And to kind of carry on that conversation, Alan asked another question in one of our tools here, saying, what kinds of things are you doing to keep ahead of the latest security threats? It's not just a business change saying, hey, we're now needing to leverage these new technologies and these new partners, platforms, whatever the case may be. There's also, that outside world who's developing new 0 days. There's new patches coming out. There's new all sorts of attack vectors that seem to show up consistently at an increasing cadence. What is going on now to make this offering one that keeps up and keeps an eye on that evolving world?
Sure. So, like, a couple of irons in the fire there, right? So the kind of easy one to talk about is something we call our threat intelligence or threat fusion center, right? So at the end of the day, we're working with a dozen or so more different intelligence. Sometimes we share it as part of a strategic partnership, and you pull that information together, right? And so the idea is you take all those different feeds from all those different folks, and the combination of these different suppliers see the vast quantities of traffic and activity across the web, and so you can pull all that together and understand what's going on out there, right? And get that information into tools where it makes sense to do so, or brief your SOC, right? You can write kind of intelligence reports and say, hey, this is what APT29 is doing. This is what Cozy Bear or whatever silly name they've given the most recent one is doing, and these are the techniques that they use, right? In addition, our CSO Brian Kelly is building a cloud sharing capability, so it allows different cloud providers and service providers to share anonymized technical data and attack data with each other, right? So if AWS sees something, or Azure sees something, or Rackspace sees something, we can get that information to other providers so that they can respond to it before the attackers necessarily moved onto the environment. So sharing that information matters a lot. I think the second big iron in the fire for that is really around the people, right? So at the end of the day, you're opposing a motivated attacker, then your teams have to be motivated, well-trained, and well-funded, right? So they have to be put through training, they have to go through experience, we have to do red team stuff, we have to push them in and push them hard, right? So when we look at, so we actually have 2 security operations centers at Rackspace. We have one focused on Rackspace, that's our internal security operations center, and then we have one focused at customers. And there's a friendly, intense rivalry between the two of them, and so we can do stuff like have one security operations center act as the red team and one act as blue, right? So one's attacking and one's defending, and it sharpens skills on both sides, right? And we do training between the 2 teams. We can do stuff where my development team, for example, is doing work that allows us to insert the signature of attacks into our tooling artificially, right? So we can kind of say, hey, look, I'm going to run, it's like running a drill in the military, right? So I'm going to go and put this information into the environment, and then I can measure how long it takes my SOC rackers to find it and respond to it in the way that we would expect, right? Are we doing things the right way? Are we doing them faster? How can we get faster? Right, and it comes down to drilling, it comes down to training, it comes down to experience, reading. We interface with a lot of our partners, and so they come down to the castle and they train our folks, and we train them when they come down as well. So there's a lot that you have to do to kind of stay up to date, and that's part of it, right? You're paying these guys to spend a significant percentage of their time staying up to date, right? And that's a required part of the job. You have to do that.
Yeah, we've had Cloudflare on this show in the past, and they talk about some of those same things where they're seeing such a large percentage of the internet traffic flow through their offering that data puts them in a unique position to see and head off some of these, like a DOS attack and things along those lines that are specifically in a Cloudflare wheelhouse. But to be able to go back and forth and get reps and see a lot of these things in action from both sides. Okay, this new threat is out there. one side use it against this other side so that they can defend against it, that gives you a more holistic view and a better idea of how it can be used and how to respond. And it's just the volume at which we're able to operate, and with the benefit of sharing data between different providers, that's just going to make the internet a safer place. And it's always going to be an arms race. There's always going to be bad actors, and there's always going to be defenders. But the larger that scope and that net is that we're casting to capture what is normal, what is going on, what's out there, that's going to be a hugely valuable thing to leverage. So I've got another question that really ties into where we're at right now in the calendar. We're about to tip into November, and November means Black Friday, and it means Cyber Monday, and we've done a lot to talk about just the preparedness you need to have for high traffic events. But for e-commerce people, Alan's asked the question specifically, how can help e-commerce shops avoid data breaches and things like that we see all the time, especially with the additional focus around that industry here in the next 2 or 3 months. This quarter is really where they make their the meat of their money. So how can they use this offering to really secure their next couple of months and the income they intend to make leading up to Christmas?
Yeah, it's a good question, right? I mean, I think obviously it's different for every customer. As you get in, you have to tune the offer, but in general, you want to be able to go out and kind of raise your deterrence level, right? Make it more difficult for customers or for attackers to operate in your environment. So you make it more expensive, you make it harder for them to do. At the end of the day, when you're in e-commerce, a lot of times you're going to be looking at threat actors that are focused on getting credit card numbers and those types of things, right? It's entirely financially focused, and so you can focus on like making your environment hard to operate in, and then you really get your detect to response time down, right? If you're able to kick people out of your environment, attackers out of your environment in that seconds to minutes time frame, then it's much harder for them to get their hands around where your data is in the environment, to get it out of your databases and those types of things, right? And there's lots of stuff you can do on the deterrent side, all the way going to encryption offers and making sure that all that data is protected in kind of significant ways. And all those raise that deterrence level and buys you time to detect them and get the attacker out of the space. So really, for the larger customers and stuff, you really need some capability of understanding what's going on in your environment. You need visibility about what's going on, and you need a team that's sitting on top of that and turning that visibility into intelligence, right? So we saw in a lot of the larger attacks for some, especially in the e-commerce space, that there were alerts that fired that would have told someone what was going on, and they didn't, right? And there's no blame here, right? Like, I've been in a lot of places where you're expecting a security analyst to look at 75,000 alerts in a day, and it's no surprise that they miss one, right? And so it's hard to build out these security operations centers. It's hard to train your folks. It's hard to tune your tools, right? You need people that can do that full time and that can focus on it and that have experience doing it. And that's what gets you down to that kind of that detect and response capability, and then invest in deterrence, right? I think, for me, I'd always invest my first buck in detect and response, right? And you give me $1.50, I'll put $1.25 in detect and response, and then I'll start putting 25 cents of deterrence, right? So it's really focused on making sure that you can respond as quickly as possible. You got to do that, right? And then you can start making your environment harder, right? And that can be good hygiene, just down to things like patching and all that type of stuff, right? You can use a managed provider to do that. You can do it yourself. Doesn't matter, but it's got to be done, right? These things come out quickly and that type of thing. And then I would focus on a more behavioral analytics type approach, because when you're talking about, especially the larger e-commerce spaces, there's so much money involved that it makes sense for an attacker to burn a 0 day on you. And these days, an attacker can go out and buy 0 days from companies like Vupen and the various other ones that are out there for not that much money, right? So if you spend, to $5-10 grand on a 0 day, but you can leverage, a $300,000 payday off of stealing some credit card numbers, like, that's cheap money. So you got to be able to pretend against those types of things. So your typical signature-based devices and stuff just won't cut it. You need that extra, security operations center oomph to really do a good job there. The other piece, for at least for folks now, I've had a couple of customers that are like, "Hey, we're really getting into the holiday season," and I'm like, "Guys, it's the holiday season now, right? We're in it, right? So, right, if you want to get it, we gotta go fast, right? We got to get things in place and get things moving, because the last thing you want to do is make big changes to your infrastructure before your most important days that you have out there, right? So, for some of our customers when they come on, we end up kind of slow rolling the tools and the changes into the environment to make sure we're not going to break something, right? At the end of the day, security is about enabling business. So I can make your website super secure by unplugging it from the internet. That's not really going to get you where you want to go, right? So we always have to mix and match those things to make sure they fit well.
That is absolutely true. Planning ahead of time goes a lot further than trying to react in the heat of the moment. If you have a plan going in, you'll be in much better shape. And also, today's the 22nd, is that right? 27th would be the Black Friday, and that's just a little bit over a month away. So there's really not a ton of time to plan before that. So get the ball rolling if you haven't, and if you have, make sure that your plans are on pace to be ready for something big like that. We're almost to the end of the hour. I've got one more question for you, and then we'll wrap things up. As this is an ever-evolving offering, and as we're staying on top of what's happening in the cybersecurity world, what's the one thing that you're most interested in, focused on, and looking forward to blossoming and developing in this cybersecurity landscape?
Oh, hard question. There's so many interesting places. So certainly the big data analytics piece is really, really critical in being able to get more leverage out of our security analysts, right? Being able to make sure that their eyes are on the right things. Super excited about a lot of work that's getting done in there. It's hard, right? Like the joke in security right now is, hey, do you know anyone that knows security and big data? It's like, yeah, I know all 8 of them, right? These are hard people to get, right? It's a very hard skill. Big data is hard to find. Security is hard to find. Those things together are real hard to find. In addition to that, there's just there's a lot of new platform support, and there's a lot of move in the IT industry. So really thinking about things like containers and Lambda, and as you start spreading data and various other things across these different providers, how do you secure that data? How do you understand what's going on? How do you get visibility going on into it? A lot of interesting stuff in there. And then there's just a lot of old standards that need to get better, right? Intrusion detection, antivirus, right? All these other platforms that have been around forever that need to get better, right? And so there's a lot of evolution going on in there, a lot of money being invested in stuff that I'm excited about, right? So I think it's fun, right? There's a lot of, this is my space. I've been in it since high school, so there's a lot of stuff that gets exciting to me. I like to spend, I'm a security nerd. That's what I do. So a lot of, very interesting stuff that's coming down the pipe. Cryptography is another big area that Rackspace invests. So we've actually built, it's a cryptography library, the most popular cryptographic library in Python. A couple of my devs have built that over the last couple of years. It's been really great to kind of see the impact that we can have in nature. Rackspace has always been an open source company. It's in our DNA. So we love to build that type of stuff. We think it's really valuable, helps our customers, helps the world at large. So excited in continuing to work on that kind of stuff as well.
Well, we're very excited to hear where this goes from here and how the offering evolves. And I'm sure we'll have in the following year so that we can have you share more of where we're going and what to be on the lookout for our customers and for those who are just out there in the ecosystem and environment. So I really appreciate your expertise, spending the hour with us, sharing what you're passionate about and what Rackspace is doing in the cybersecurity space. So thank you for your time. And we do these shows every week, Thursdays at 1 Central. So join us next week. We'll be covering a new topic, and we'll be digging into more solutions and hopefully be helpful as much as we can to help cloud users and IT workers get the most out of what they're doing. So thanks everybody for watching. Thanks Jarret for your time, and we will see you guys next week.
Great. Thanks, guys.